Steelers fans, stop everything you're doing right now because what I'm about to share with you could completely reshape this roster before the season even starts. We're talking about a massive offensive lineman who helped create a 2,000-yard rushing season, a superstar running back being compared to one of the NBA's greatest athletes, and 5 different NFL franchises circling around one of Pittsburgh's most productive pass rushers like sharks smelling blood in the water. This is not drill time, folks. This is real championship window decision-making happening in real time, and if you're not subscribed to this channel yet, you need to fix that immediately because things are moving fast, and you cannot afford to miss a single update. Hit that subscribe button right now. Let's dive in. Alright, let's start with something that came across my desk that honestly made me do a double take. We're talking about a 363-pound offensive lineman who is currently sitting out there in free agency, and multiple analysts are connecting the dots between him and the Pittsburgh Steelers. His name is Mekhi Becton, and before you jump to any conclusions, let me walk you through this entire story because it's way more complicated than it might seem on the surface. Becton was drafted 11th overall back in 2020 by the New York Jets. Think about that for a second. 11th overall. That's first-round, top-tier, franchise-changing draft capital. The Jets looked at this guy coming out of Louisville and said, "This is our future. This is the guy we're building our offensive line around." That tells you everything you need to know about what his ceiling looked like when he was coming into the league. The size, the athleticism, the potential. It was all there. But here's where the story gets messy. Injuries absolutely derailed his time in New York. He couldn't stay on the field, couldn't build consistency, couldn't develop into what the Jets desperately needed him to become. It looked like another classic case of a high draft pick who just couldn't put it together at the NFL level. But then, something interesting happened. Philadelphia gave him a shot. The Eagles brought him in for 2024, moved him to right guard, and suddenly, Mekhi Becton was starting on a Super Bowl championship team. Not just starting, but actively contributing to one of the most dominant offensive performances we saw all season long. You remember what Saquon Barkley did last year? 2,000 yards rushing. That's rarefied air in today's NFL. That's historic production. And Becton was right there in the trenches helping make it happen. So naturally, the Los Angeles Chargers looked at that tape and said, "We want a piece of that." They signed him to a 2-year, $20 million deal in March of 2025. That's real money for a guy who's supposed to be damaged goods, right? But here's the brutal truth about the NFL. One good season doesn't guarantee anything. Last year with the Chargers was an absolute disaster for Becton. We're talking career worst numbers across the board. His run blocking grade dropped to 35.5. His pass protection mark came in at 47.8. Those aren't just bad numbers. Those are replacement level numbers. Those are the kind of grades that get you cut, which is exactly what happened. The Chargers released him this spring before free agency even really heated up. So now we've got a former first-round pick, a guy who's 6'7" and 363 pounds, a guy who, just 1 year ago, was blocking for a 2,000-yard rusher, sitting out there available for whatever team wants to take a chance on him. And this is where Pittsburgh enters the conversation. Mo Moton over at Bleacher Report specifically named the Steelers as a potential landing spot, calling Becton a bargain bin option that could help a team in 2026. Now, before Steelers fans start getting either too excited or too worried, let me give you the complete context of what this would actually mean for this roster. Omar Khan has been incredibly intentional about how he's built this offensive line. He's not going out there throwing money at aging veterans hoping to patch holes. He's drafting talent, developing it, and building depth through the draft consistently year after year. Look at the investment he's already made. Troy Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Max Eichenberg, Jennings Dunker, Brock Hoffman, Spencer Anderson. That's real draft capital committed to this unit. That's a general manager who has a vision for how he wants to protect his quarterback and open lanes for his running backs, and he's executing that vision methodically. So if Becton comes to Pittsburgh, he's not walking in as the savior. He's not the guy who's going to solve all the problems. He would be depth. He would be an insurance policy. He would be that veteran body you bring into camp. You see if he's healthy. You see if he's motivated. And you find out if there's anything left in the tank that can contribute when injuries inevitably happen during a long NFL season. And let's be real about something else. When you're 6'7" and you weigh 363 pounds, You create problems for defensive linemen that very few players in this league can replicate. That size alone is a weapon if the guy attached to it can still move and still compete. Here's my honest take on this whole Becton situation, and I want to be completely transparent with you. I would not make this a priority move. I really wouldn't. The Steelers already have legitimate depth on the offensive line. They've invested heavily in young talent that they believe in. Bringing in a guy who just posted the worst season of his career adds uncertainty to a position group that desperately needs clarity and continuity, especially with Aaron Rodgers under center at 42 years old. You cannot afford to have question marks on your offensive line when your quarterback is that age and that immobile. But, and this is a big but, if Becton is willing to sign for the absolute minimum, for a prove-it deal, for the kind of contract that reflects exactly where his market value is right now after that disaster in Los Angeles, then, yeah, I'd have the conversation. If he shows up to training camp healthy, if he's motivated, if he's humble enough to understand he's fighting for a roster spot and not walking into a starting role, then there's no harm in kicking the tires. The price has to be right, the expectations have to be clear. And even then, I'm only viewing this as camp competition and emergency depth, nothing more. Because here's the reality that every Steelers fan needs to understand. Aaron Rodgers turns 43 in December. Every single layer of protection matters. Every backup matters. Every contingency plan matters. You cannot go into a Super Bowl run with question marks at any position, and offensive line depth is absolutely critical. But Becton has to prove he deserves to be part of that equation. He has to earn the right to put on that black and gold jersey. Omar Khan shouldn't be handing out charity roster spots. This is a win-now team, and every single player needs to contribute or get out of the way. Now, let's shift gears completely, because the next story is where things get really spicy for Steelers fans. We're talking about a potential trade scenario that could bring one of the most electrifying running backs in football to Pittsburgh, and the comparison being made is absolutely wild. CBS Sports writer Garrett Podell just compared Indianapolis Colts running back Jonathan Taylor to Giannis Antetokounmpo. Yeah, you heard that right. The Greek Freak. One of the most dominant, physically gifted athletes in professional basketball. That's the level of talent we're talking about here. Jonathan Taylor is not just good. He's elite. He's a game changer. He's the kind of player who forces defensive coordinators to completely alter their game plans. And right now, there's legitimate speculation building that Indianapolis might move him before the trade deadline. And Pittsburgh is right at the top of the list of teams that should be making that phone call. Let me give you the full context of why this situation is even possible. The Colts are in a really weird spot right now. Last season, they started 8-2. They looked like a playoff lock. They looked like they had figured something out. And then the bottom completely fell out. They lost 7 straight games to close the season. 7. That's not just a rough patch. That's a full organizational collapse. And when you have a franchise player like Jonathan Taylor on the roster, and you're wasting his prime years on a team that can't win when it matters, the pressure on general manager Chris Ballard and head coach Shane Steichen becomes enormous. So here's the thinking. If Indianapolis starts 2026 the same way they finished 2025, if they're struggling, if the losses are piling up, if it becomes clear that this roster isn't built to compete right now, then Taylor immediately becomes their most valuable trade chip. He becomes the asset they can move to rebuild, to stockpile draft picks, to reset the timeline. And when that happens, every contender in the AFC should be ready to start a bidding war. Let's talk specifics because the numbers matter here. Taylor is entering the final year of a 3-year, $42 million extension. His base salary this season is just under $12 million, with a cap hit of about $15.5 million for Indianapolis. He's 27 years old, which is still prime age for a running back in today's NFL, and he's coming off a season where he led the entire league in rushing attempts, rushing touchdowns, and rushing first downs. That's not just production, that's dominance. Now, if Pittsburgh acquires him, and this is critical, there's almost certainly going to be an extension attached to that deal. Taylor isn't going to agree to be traded to a team without long-term security. So the real cost isn't just whatever draft picks Omar Khan has to give up, it's also the multi-year contract extension that comes with it. That's a significant commitment of resources at a position where the rest of the NFL has been actively moving away from big investments. But here's why it makes sense for Pittsburgh specifically. Jaylen Warren and Rico Dowdle are solid players. They give this team a functional backfield. But Jonathan Taylor is a completely different level of talent. Imagine this offense for a second. Aaron Rodgers under center, DK Metcalf on the outside stretching the field, Michael Pittman Jr. giving you possession receiver reliability, and now you add Jonathan Taylor in the backfield as a legitimate three-down workhorse who can run, catch, and pass protect. That's a nightmare to defend. That's the kind of offensive versatility that wins playoff games in January. The fit is absolutely undeniable. The timing with Rodgers and what's very likely his final season is undeniable. But, and this is where I'm going to be completely honest with you, the cost of trading for a running back and then extending him is real capital at a position that the rest of the league is devaluing. Look around the NFL, teams are winning Super Bowls with running back committees. Teams are finding productive backs in the middle rounds of the draft. The days of giving huge contracts to running backs are fading fast, and there's legitimate analytical reasons why that's happening. So here's where I land on Jonathan Taylor, and I want to be really clear about this. If the Colts completely collapse early in the season, if they're 2-6 or 3-7 by mid-October, and if the asking price drops to something reasonable like a late second-round pick, then Omar Khan absolutely has to make that phone call. You don't pass up that kind of talent at that price when your championship window is open. But if Indianapolis is still demanding a high second-round pick or even a first-rounder, plus the expectation of a massive extension, then I'm staying patient. I'm trusting Warren and Dowdle. I'm not mortgaging future draft capital and cap flexibility for one position when this roster has other needs that still have to be addressed. The window is open for Pittsburgh right now. It's wide open. But it's not so narrow that they need to panic and overpay just to feel like they did something. Smart teams make smart moves at the right price. Desperate teams overpay and regret it later. I trust Omar Khan to know the difference. Now, this is where things get really interesting because the third story ties everything together in a way that Steelers fans need to understand. We've got 5 different NFL teams actively monitoring one of Pittsburgh's best pass rushers, and a 6th team just entered the conversation. The player we're talking about is Alex Highsmith, and the newest team showing interest is the Indianapolis Colts. Fansided writer Ernesto Cova just made a detailed case for why Indianapolis should pull the trigger on a Highsmith trade before training camp even opens. And honestly, the argument makes a lot of sense when you break it down. Let me give you the full picture of what's happening here and why this might be the most important decision Omar Khan makes this entire offseason. Alex Highsmith is 28 years old. He's played 90 NFL games across 6 seasons. He's accumulated 45 career sacks, 10 forced fumbles, 3 interceptions, and a defensive touchdown. Last season alone, he posted 9.5 sacks and 50 total tackles in just 13 games. This is not a player in decline. This is not a